I still need to make a stand for my 20-inch bandsaw and my 14-inch bandsaw, and I figure while I'm at it, I could also make another cabinet like these two, which are very handy for panther rotors and slot mortisers. So I bought a whole bunch of 2x4s and I cut these to pieces of the right length on my table saw. After that, I flattened one edge and one face of each one on my jointer. And then I ran them through a thickness planer to do the other face. It turns out I had the planer and the dust collector plugged into the same circuit. I kind of realized that when this happened. And with so many pieces, I figured the thickness planer was the best way to get them to the right width. Except I forgot to turn on the dust collector, so the hose popped off and made a huge mess. Here's the front and back faces for my 3 stands all squared up. Next thing I need to do is cut box joints in the end of them. I'm going to cut these joints with my Screw Advance box joint jig, and I'm just experimenting with directing more of the dust from the saw blade into the saw. So I've got this block with a slot in it to keep the dust from going on either side, which means it comes out the back. And right here I've got this block that also has a slot in it, so that when I push the jig past the blade, the dust has to go down into the saw instead of coming out here. I'm using my usual method of making 2 cuts to hug out each 1/4 inch slot, with the second cut made on the backstroke. Well, that block and this block help in terms of keeping the dust inside the saw, but it's not 100% effective. There's still quite a bit of dust that came out. I also screwed up a little bit. The slots are too narrow, so these ones don't really fit at all. And rather than make new pieces, I just moved the piece of tape that marks my second cut for these pieces. So these ones have slightly wider slots, so these will actually fit together. I also cut the fingers a little bit too short, but it's only a tool stand, so whatever. I got my 6 frames for the 3 stands all joined up, and the next thing I need to do is to join in some pieces like this. I've just cut all of the mortises in this corner, and to do this corner I need to change my setup to put the stop on this side and the clamp on the other side. Now I set it up with this block to set the distance from the rightmost extent to the stop. So for the other side, I'm just going to use that same block. Now this clamp placed in a hole is not going to stay put, so I made this block here and I slide that underneath the clamp, and that holds it in place. And I've just discovered another trick. Whenever I bump this clamp, it falls all the way down, but if I put a magnet against here, then up against the magnet, it won't fall down if I bump it. And here's gluing the second of my tool stands together. Sometimes using clamps is more effective at closing those joints than it is to use a hammer. I just dry fit this one together, and it's going to be a tool stand like this one. So I want to put some side panels in there, and for that I have to cut some grooves in the side before I glue it together. I hand planed the slight round over on the inside edges. Every time I glue in a plywood panel like this, people say you shouldn't glue it in because it needs to expand and contract. But I'm sure most of you understand the fallacy of that logic. The last part is always the hardest to glue on, with 4 mortise and tenons and 2 panels that need to line up all at once. I don't know where this joint got hung up on, but I don't like leaving unsightly gaps like that. And now whittling that round over all the way into the corner. Next, I want to inset a panel into the top like this, and for that I have to route a rabbet all around the edge. Ideally I'd use a router rabbeting bit, but I still don't have one because every time I need to route a rabbet, I just end up putting a guide on the router like this. Fitting one of these panels is always tricky because the hole is always half a millimeter wider maybe on one end than it is on the other. But this time it only took 3 or 4 tries on the table saw to get it to fit close enough. I hate paying for caster wheels, so I'm always scrounging whatever used ones I can find. And of course I always like to use the shittiest casters first, like these ones for instance. I made some all hardwood plywood flanges for these to fit onto. This one holds the pantry router, this one holds my 20-inch bandsaw, and this one will get my 14-inch bandsaw. I still need to make drawers for all of these, but I'll save that for another time. And ever since I built my Screw Advance box joint jig, box joint corners in cabinets like this have been a key design element for strength. Because if you make a box that's fully enclosed, even if it's just plywood with pocket holes, it's pretty rigid, but as soon as you have an opening on the front, then it's subject to racking like this. So by making the corners with the box joint jig like that, that keeps the face nice and square, and that keeps the box nice and rigid, like this one is when the lid is closed.